All right. Hey, y'all. It is Jordan Guest. We are back with another episode of the Bitcoin Suits podcast. And today we have Jeremy Almond. He's the CEO and co-founder of Paystand. I'm excited to get to know Jeremy more and understand what exactly Paystand does, what's the value add that it is bringing to the Bitcoin space and for business owners. So I'll throw it over to you, Jeremy. Maybe, give us a, just quick intro and maybe also if you want to go ahead and dive into what got you into Bitcoin, I think that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, awesome. So, hey, Jordan, it's great to be here. Just honored to spend time with you and the audience. My name is Jeremy Almond. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Paystand. It's a bit of a quiet giant, I guess, in the Bitcoin space. We operate the largest and fastest growing business-to-business financial network that's built on the Bitcoin blockchain. We've been in the space for very, very long time, mostly behind the scenes. But most people don't realize the kind of size and scale we are. So today we operate about 1 million businesses that pay on our platform. You can think of us as like a PayPal or Square, but for large companies. We do about 15 billion in transaction volume, mostly through large clients. And we are kind of a bridge between sort of TradFi and next gen Bitcoin-based infrastructure. And so we're about 2% of all the US account-to-account payments on the commercial side. And our ultimate goal, and we'll probably get into this, is really about economic empowerment. It's, if we move people from the traditional financial infrastructure with better, cheaper, faster, more efficient financial infrastructure, you can help their companies thrive. And we think that's really good and important for the economy. And then on the personal side, I've been in the space for a very, very long time. I originally, got into the space because I was there during Occupy Wall Street. I'd been in tech and in sort of finance for most of my career. But I'm the product or son of Main Street. My parents never went to high school or college. My mother came across the border. My father is a blue collar construction worker. And seeing how the economic system gets teared down by the financial system's unfairness was really bothered me. And so, I think 2008, 2009 was this catalyzing change for something better. And so I did my master's thesis on why banks were too big to fail, and got down the rabbit hole, almost over 15 years ago now, 2009, 2010. So
beautiful. Wow. So I guess for you, it sounds like you guys are B2B payments on the Bitcoin blockchain. Like first question off the bat for me is what is your all's target customer? Are you all medium-sized businesses? Are you on the enterprise level? Do you service any, more mom and pop type of businesses? And then maybe a quick follow-up is, it sounds like it spans all industries. Or is there any kind of niche that you all find yourselves being more popular in, just in terms of the type of business that you serve?
Yeah, so we typically serve medium-sized to large companies. That's kind of our core sweet spot. And we'll service companies of all sizes, but I'll describe why a company's size becomes more important to use, sort of our digital asset infrastructure as you scale. So today, most companies outside of, an on-chain enabled world, they're using legacy financial infrastructure to either collect their revenue or to send their payments out. And it's extremely inefficient. So it'll take days to receive your money in the mail. So most companies in the US still actually receive checks or wires, which is absolutely insane. Both were built before the internet. So it's slow and manual. Or they might use some digital fintech company or something based on Visa and MasterCard. And these cartels charge companies 3% or more on their payments. And we service companies of kind of all kinds of industries, but oftentimes the real economy. So think a manufacturing company or large agriculture company or supply chain company. And so if a company like Visa or MasterCard or the banks are taking 3% of these guys' income, that might be you're a CPA, that might be 20% of their profits, which is absolutely insane. And so as the companies get bigger, that just gets more and more painful. And so we'll service companies of all sizes, but the companies where we can oftentimes put millions of dollars back on the bottom line for a company to run their business more effectively with a financial operating system that's modern, where you use us. And Bitcoin is both a store of value, and we also think a medium of exchange, and we also think of it as a technology innovation. And ultimately, our view is for a company in the digital age, they should be able to move money at the speed of light because it's tech. It should be completely automated and self-driving and agentic. There's all this intelligent technology, and it should be done at extremely low cost. You can send an email, I can stream a video. So it's insane that there's these sort of taxes in the process. And so in our process, we just allow them to do that. You can pay a bill instantly. You can do it completely automated. You can stack sats while you do it with our cool corporate card, and you can just run your business efficiently. So.
Okay. There's a lot of different directions that we could go from there. Trying to think best next route. I mean, on the manufacturing side. So if we just take a business like that,
yep.
Is this a business that, like, are we already in the world where they are getting paid in Bitcoin and then they're also sending out in Bitcoin? Or is it that's more so the rails, but from their standpoint, from their accounting standpoint, they're still seeing incoming monies in dollar terms and outgoing monies in dollar terms, or whatever the local currency, I guess, needs to be for whatever jurisdiction they're based out of. Is that, or is it actually Bitcoin?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm fully believer that eventually, companies will operate on the Bitcoin standard, right? Like I personally do. Our company is a very Bitcoin native company internally, but that's actually quite rare. And so I think one of the reasons why Paystand exists is actually to be the bridge. And so, a lot of companies want to know how is it useful? And so there's a few ways that they normally get engaged. One could be, we have a corporate card and expense product. So think of like a next gen Amex card. And, companies need a company specific one because you have different employees who, have different budgets and, they're going to a conference or they're doing marketing spend and they need to be set. And so we've got all the corporate expense, and control features that you would expect in a company focused card. But then, it earns rewards not in some, Amex points or travel points that you have no idea what it does, but you stack sats, you can earn sats. That's really cool because, if you think about it, what that does is helps the company, have Bitcoin on their treasury in really a risk off kind of way. Companies that we service, it's a big deal to, convince the board to go and buy Bitcoin, right? Like that might take a little bit of time. So this is a way they can, spend dollars, earn sats. So that's an example of something that gets the company more Bitcoin native. On the other hand, that's on the payable side. On the receivable side, revenue is the lifeblood of a company. And it may be that, they're using our infrastructure and they're not aware day one it's even Bitcoin. They just might be a manufacturing company and, maybe you're a Bitcoin mining company and you're sending out, the invoices for your suppliers to buy, more equipment. And, the normal way would be to send a $10,000 or $100,000 check from the buyer, or a wire, which is slow and expensive. And so with us, they just, onboard, have a very simple experience. Again, think of like a standard peer-to-peer experience, and the money just moves automatically. They can send out the invoice. That invoice you can do a single click to pay. And then from there, they can attach their accounts and it can run over our network and it can behave like fiat because a lot of these people are still, doing a lot of their traditional invoices in fiat. It can terminate back to their financial system, usually their ERP, like a Oracle or a NetSuite or a Microsoft. But it'll run over the rails, which means it's better, cheaper, and faster. So, it can be both rails, it can be a technology, or it can be, sort of an asset and a store of value for treasury.
Okay. Now, and we didn't really get into this pre-show. Something I'm working on is a SaaS play that's more so on the accounting and tax side. Is that something you all tackle with the payments, or do you set it up in such a way that there is, it's so instantaneous to convert back and forth that there actually is that you don't do any tax reporting, or do you all have partners that help with the tax reporting? I'm just thinking, if there is any back and forth between Bitcoin and dollars, generally we've got to record a gain or loss if it's, if it was held for any amount of time. How do you all think about that and approach it?
Yeah. So Jordan, we agree. You absolutely should be doing what you're doing, which is helping companies, have, auditable, sort of financial statements, which include, the tax and the governing bodies it needs to. Business is just required, right? Like you as a person can have your own point of view, but as a company, you have a compliance requirement usually as you get bigger. And so one of the things we do is, so we're not the accounting software or the financial system, right? So that might be, if you're small, that might be QuickBooks. If you're, larger, it might be NetSuite. If you're quite big, it'll be Oracle or SAP, which I spent a bunch of time with in my earlier career. And what you find there is a couple of things. One, if you're operating on our rails and they look like fiat, if fiat on one side, fiat on the other side, and just operating on the Bitcoin blockchain, ultimately your issue is just reconciliation, right? So you don't need to record gains and losses, but today, if you get a check or a wire, those payments are manually reconciled back to the books. What we think about this sort of automated smart contract driven money is that should all just happen automatically. So one thing we do is we, have automated reconciliation, reporting, cash application, all of these sort of things that make a CPA or your CFO life easier, because this is just programmable money. So it should just automatically report back to the system. So our system does that. So that's why a lot of people buy us, because that could be, an entire team if you're a larger company trying to do that.
Yeah.
And then we also do and partner if you are doing some level of actually Bitcoin native transactions, whether that's recording the rewards or the treasury or whatever. We're not the tax company and we're not the finance company, but we make that reconciliation a lot easier because most of the TradFi companies aren't necessarily even aware of how you might record Bitcoin on the balance sheet of, say, NetSuite. But we have a lot of experience with that, so we help with there. And then we also, we think of it as, how do you help the organization just get more used to, if you're more of a Bitcoin native company, you need to go back and forth. And so what does that look like? And Paystand itself is like client number one, because, we were, I think probably, one of the first handful of companies that way back before it was cool, we had Bitcoin on the balance sheet. We were operating, our own receivables, through our own network. And so we needed to record it. We had the first corporate card that we ourselves, we have 400 employees, they all use it to spend. And so how do you record it? So we were quiet, but quite involved in things like ensuring, how does FASB report this kind of stuff, the Financial Accounting Standard Board, for companies that are, need to do it in a compliant way. So.
Okay. That's so interesting. Okay. Were you in Vegas, by the way?
I was. It's my least favorite place in the world, but it is amazing to see conferences that, a decade ago I'd go and there's 50 people, and then now, there's 50,000 people. It's insane.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the popular memes that I think, at least I saw coming out of that conference was this really a Bitcoin conference, or was this a stablecoin conference? And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you how you all are thinking about stable coins in regards to payments and how that fits into Paystand, and just, how does it work in conjunction with Bitcoin? Not to trigger some of the listeners maybe, but I think it is it's a worthwhile ask, because I think stable coins are not going away.
You're right. I think stable coins. So I have a personal view, but I'll give you the industry view first before we get into like kind of my nuanced maxi view. But on the stablecoin side, so here's one of the things I would say, just as, it's funny, we've raised a lot of money as a private, Silicon Valley based company. We'll go public at some point, but we're probably not super well known in the Bitcoin community, and that was at some point by design. We wanted to prove that there was kind of a real company in the space that created real value, that was focused on sort of normal companies. And so I spent a lot of my time, sort of orange pilling, TradFi companies, TradFi bankers, et cetera. And, that journey's been really interesting building this company over, the decade and a half or whatever. And what I found is, for years and years and years, we had to say the words Bitcoin or say about the value that, sound money and a, sort of optimal digital peer-to-peer network can do. But we learned we had to do it without using the word Bitcoin for many years, because we had, I still have to operate in a compliant way with the regulated, industries in the government. We're a financial service provider. I still have to partner with banks, even if I have my own kind of feelings about that. And so, we learned to speak the value of Bitcoin as opposed to the religion of Bitcoin first. And what that did was that slowly brought people on board. And so, we'd say, shouldn't money just move at the speed of light? Should there be a middleman in the middle of money? Shouldn't it be sort of automated, intelligent? And shouldn't it be at low cost? Turns out that doesn't operate in, a Visa, MasterCard, and federal kind of environments. So you slowly kind of get them there without, using the word. And so even today in Silicon Valley, which is, as much as, you have Bitcoin treasury companies and you have the public markets that are starting to come around, Silicon Valley's VCs still are skeptical because of, quite frankly, they got burned by many different cycles. And so what I've seen over the last 6 to 12 months is that world, the first words that they finally can utter are that are in close to our space or adjacent to our space, stable coins. So bank CEOs now come and ask me to talk about stable coins, and then I'll slowly talk about Bitcoin. They come, sort of the regulators. Some of them are, now because we have people in the administration who are, Bitcoiners. It's okay, but then we have other regulators who are they can say stable coins, and then we can slowly talk to them. So I think that's just what I would say is the first step on the bridge over. And the way I would describe this is, stable coins and other, innovations in the space are really, I think innovations on top of traditional fintech. So my traditional fintech friends who basically have been operating on top of traditional bank rails, even if they're fancy UIs that, make these big companies, they're really just built on top of traditional bank rails. Stablecoins are kind of the first step for them to understand something that's semi-decentralized. And so I say, good job, keep coming along the journey. And as an innovation in fintech, it is, and there's a bunch of reasons why I would say it is an innovation in, pipes and shovels settling between, big institutions. What I would just say is the invention of a new form of money that's entirely decentralized and, free of authoritarian control and truly sound money, that's a bigger innovation. And so I think you can both say, hey, stable coins are good innovation for fintech and bring them along the journey, and then say, hey, but that thing about money that's actually like the foundation of our economic and community systems around the world that might be broken, like come along that journey too.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, to me, it seems like stable coins, personally, it seems like they're just like the newest tool in the government's toolkit to kind of kick the debt problem down the road a little bit more, because now they've got brand new buyer of long duration bonds, and that's good for them. But I think you're spot on when you say it's almost like our new Trojan horse, because as stable coins grow, on the payment side, I think it's great. But then when people are considering their savings, why not sweep your savings over into Bitcoin? And I think that grows our market cap. So, So that's great. Okay, I want to, we're part of a podcast network that is mining focused, and so maybe we pivot a little bit over to do you all work within the Bitcoin mining ecosystem, and if so, what's your all's role to play there?
Yeah, we have two, I suppose, roles there. One is as a sort of digital transaction service and mining company ourselves, and then we also serve some of our products increasingly to the mining industry, and that's relatively new. But what we've observed over time is, the mining industry looks a lot like our real economy customers. So there's manufacturing companies, aka Bitcoin mining manufacturing companies. There's supply chain and distribution companies. There's data hosting companies. There are so these are all actually mining companies in a way. Operate more like the real economy than like Silicon Valley traditional tech companies, and we love that because these are the customers we typically serve on our kind of day job business. And so mining, we have our corporate card and expense product. It's called Team Pay. Increasingly the top mining companies are using that. They love it because it's a product built for them so that they can purchase their goods and services on it. They can have their teams use it. Stacking sats is native to them, so they love that. They also, I think more, if I just zoom out in the mining industry, it's crazy to me that like the folks that either were debanked, I think that's true with everybody in the industry, and we all have our stories over beer that we can discuss, or have limited access to high quality banking, which is quite interesting to me because these are, not companies doing some token scam or something like that, but literally like building real semiconductor equipment or real logistics businesses. And the number of times I'll talk to a company that's, a couple $100 million in revenue or something or bigger, and they're like, yeah, we can't get access to banking. We have no access to credit. We have no access to like top tier commercial cards. And you're like, that's insane. You guys would be, a class A company in a regular world if you just say data hosting company or manufacturing semiconductor equipment. And so, I think because we've built up a lot of trust in the traditional financial industry over time by being kind of the rational actor, our ability to deliver services and products for the mining industry, as someone who can, translate for them their incredible businesses they've built over time that, quite frankly, the banks just don't understand and the financial infrastructure doesn't understand. Great sound companies with great businesses. So we're really happy to support those guys. So, we'd love you guys to use cards, our corporate card, if anybody's in that space, or, our Paystand products. But we also feel like we understand it because, we ourselves are an operator in the space. And that story is kind of also, I don't talk about this too much. It's been a bit of an under the radar story. So we started mining way back, but really just to be able to have access at the technical layer to the blockchain when our network is operating on it. So there were sort of advantages if we're running the volume we're running, and we kind of have our own layer 2 between companies. That is how our payment network works. And so it was really important for us to be able to, have clear visibility, run our own nodes, be able to sort of peg to the network in the very specific way our software team does. And so for a long time, the servers, whether they were the nodes or the sort of mining systems, were actually run by our engineering team. And so we weren't trying to build profit out of it. We were just actually trying to get advantage to build a better software and network. And then at some point, as our company's gotten to scale, we started realizing that operation was not tiny. And so we kind of took this Amazon sort of approach where we said, at some point, Amazon needed to build like a real, commerce company that proved that the internet was useful and valuable. And so that was their core business. And we think about that's kind of payments for us, as our core business is to prove that the Bitcoin blockchain is useful for businesses to run payments through that. But then Amazon said, we've got a lot of infrastructure here to do that. We're pretty good at it. We should probably actually, take that infrastructure and scale it to really build, sort of more of a business out of it. And so, a couple of years ago, we sort of quietly started doing that process where, now that side of our business is, a fairly fast growing area of our business. It different than like a traditional mining company. It lives to serve our network, and the million companies that operate on it. But there are very interesting opportunities if you sort of flip something that's CapEx and OpEx into also a profit center. So, we think of it as our modern day AWS, for the Bitcoin ecosystem. So.
Okay. And then you all have your own foundation as well, right? And that's operating and giving back in Bitcoin. I mean, I know you mentioned earlier kind of the human rights and just the human flourishing. Maybe touch on that a little bit. I think that's a really interesting aspect of your all's overall strategy.
Yeah, it's probably the thing I love the most. It's like my day job is talking to folks like you do, in the financial sector. But the nights and weekends with the mask and the cape, I think Bitcoin is a tool for freedom, and ultimately human flourishing. And I think one of the things I saw was a lot of us that were early in the Bitcoin space started for ideological reasons, not number go up, right? We wanted to see more freedom and fairness in a system that was punitive and corrupt. And I think also one of the things, so money itself, just needs to be redeemed in some sense, and I think that's why a lot of us believe in Bitcoin. And then I'd also say, because my career has been in the company building side, I think capitalism in a lot of ways also could use a little bit of redemption. And so, I think we put those two things together and said, we want to build a different kind of company. If we build a company that is, the successful company built on, the ideology of Bitcoin, and yet it just becomes another 1% thing, that maybe doesn't serve why, many of us started. And so we said, well, how should company building be done in a democratized financial age, when banks just fundamentally seem like the opposite of that? So how could we rethink it? And so we said, listen, we want to kind of follow something that's more like a Patagonia model or other models that are a little bit more holistic in company building, and say those who are blessed should be a blessing back to the ecosystem. And so that's kind of a long wind up for our philanthropic effort called Paystand.org. And so today, Paystand.org is probably the largest corporate backer of the circular economies around the world that use Bitcoin that really drive financial inclusion. And so we, quietly started that a couple of years ago. We give a material portion of our profits back directly to this, NGO. The NGO has no agenda other than to help see Bitcoin, thrive in, places in the global South and in the least of these. And what we've seen has just been absolutely incredible. So whether it's, the stories of El Salvador or Guatemala or Peru, or South Africa or Afghanistan, we've just seen real lives change, real communities change. And, so ultimately outcomes of transformation of cultures and societies that the UN has talked about for, 70 years. And we see actually Bitcoin being a catalyzing force that does those outcomes at an order of magnitude faster speed and better outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's when you're talking to, really anybody, but especially business leaders, and you're able to point to just the human flourishment that can come about by freeing people from, private property infringements or just terrible, inflation where people have no way of planning their next week, let alone their next year. I've always just found that is the strongest argument to why someone should take Bitcoin seriously and at least give it a look. And that resonates with a person of any kind of political, persuasion. And so that's really powerful. You guys are really involved with that. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I think one of the side notes there that's been surprising to me is we kind of intended those two things to operate reasonably independently, and I've been surprised at I thought it would kind of be a one-way streak. The company would give to the philanthropic efforts, and then we'd be helping these communities, and that enough is incredible. But I've been surprised at what it's done going the other direction. So like I said, a lot of my day job, I end up spending time with tech CEOs or VCs or, bank CEOs or whatever. And quite frankly, many of them are skeptical of Bitcoin, and they'd say, okay, well, maybe its number go up, but, is it actually used in any real way? And so I started slowly doing these, field trips, fellowship things, where we would bring them down. We'd bring cohorts of VCs and bankers and folks down to places like, El Salvador or Peru or whatever they were involved with. And we'd say just come see,
yeah.
And what I learned was over years, I used to get frustrated to try to describe Bitcoin to kind of people who are not, down the rabbit hole. And it takes time. And what I learned was actually the best way to orange pill somebody is actually just to show them and let them touch it, see it, feel it, because it's hard to argue with. And so, we'd start taking people down there and I'd say, look, you think like tech is radically transforming in the middle of Silicon Valley or New York or whatever, finance. But I'll tell you, some pupusa maker down in, whatever, El Salvador or Guatemala is actually way more sophisticated than you are. And they just tell me I'm crazy. And then we take them down there and I'm like, look, here is a self-custodied wallet that this person is using that can be able to move money, instantly at the speed of light with no cost, no access to banking. They're doing it all in that village. By the way, there's no cost, and they are able to hedge the money that they're making and actually have a store of value. And then that pupusa maker is growing, their little, pupusa monopoly with sound money, and doing it in a currency hedging way that's more sophisticated than most of your clients are. And people, when they see that, and then they buy the pupusa, and then they're like, talk to, whatever, Mama Rosa or whoever, like their minds are just blown. So, we think in that way, Bitcoin is a movement that's bigger than any one company, community, part of the ecosystem. And that's what makes it so special. And so, we're honored to kind of touch, just a number of places, behind the scenes. And I hope we're more of a show and less tell kind of company. So,
yeah, no, that's really cool. Yeah. So let's stick on some of those conversations you're having with some of the, bank CEOs, CFOs of companies. How do you approach the conversation as it relates to Bitcoin of Bitcoin is an asset? That's kind of what people know it as, right? But then it also is this network of nodes, and that's really how transactions, get verified. How do you approach that conversation between it being an asset and it being an underlying financial infrastructure or a network that's global, in terms of sending payments wherever you want, whenever you want?
Yeah, I think it's cool, right? Like, people are starting to get to the point where they understand it's a store of value, right? It's right now roughly 2 trillion, which is $2 trillion in an asset, historically doesn't just go away. So people are starting to slowly realize it's here to stay. I think most people are still struggling with, how much that asset will eat a lot of the financial markets, and it will, because it's just, sound money and scarce, and, it's decentralized. And so the asset itself is kind of on a path that's just hard to argue, right? Like there's this, meme that, it's like the caveman says number go up, and then the smart person is doing all this, sort of, deep analysis. And then the person who's just been there for a long time just goes, yeah, something that is provably scarce and useful, ultimately we become more valuable. And technology ultimately is a deflationary force. And so, friends like Jeff Booth talk about that. And so these are all things that I think, are provable at this point. And so people will be on that journey. I think the one that's a little bit more hotly contested, which is ironic because in the early days, it was sort of a flip of the view, is the notion of medium of exchange or technology or infrastructure. And what we would say there is, you don't want to just buy Bitcoin, you want to use Bitcoin. And it's sort of like, you don't want to just like know about the internet in the 90s when I got started in technology. You want to like use it in your business. Like it's cool if you just want to go like surf the internet, but if you're a company builder, like using the internet made your company like have a competitive advantage. And so in our company's case, we use it in all kinds of things. So we use it to not just hold treasury, which makes our balance sheet stronger. We use it to pay employees, for example. And by paying employees, and employees get a choice, like how much of their bonuses move over, how much of their salary moves over. That is a really unique advantage for employees. And employees get smarter. Employees, like their value gets created more over time. In their kind of real dollar terms, their salary is going up. So that's a competitive advantage for us. We offer a 401k that's both a traditional 401k, but then they also can, allocate to Bitcoin. That is a competitive advantage for us. We are a customer of ourselves. So, we are able to get our own clients money of millions of businesses that use our platform, thousands of enterprises that use our software. We don't pay Visa and MasterCard, and the wires fees. So we have a higher operating margin, right? Like, so that's a competitive advantage. So, and then when you look even at our infrastructure business, the mining side, it's like by being in that space and being native, we see more opportunities. If you were early as your company to transform your company to be an internet native company, even if you are, an insurance company or a supply chain company or any traditional business, but if you became internet native early, you saw way more advantages how to transform your company. And so that's our encouragement to companies is buying Bitcoin's good, like good job. But there are way more areas for you to lean in and use it. You will be amazed at the competitive advantages because ultimately there are two things that are going on in society right now that I think are like, once in a millennia changes. And we're in the middle of it, which is so cool as business leaders. Yeah. The change in labor force with agentic technology is massive. I think most business leaders are aware of that. And so they're kind of scrambling. But the change in sort of monetary and economic infrastructure is equally transformational. And so you have equal competitive advantage. So just like if you're going to be, help try to drive your company to be more agentic with AI, if you're not doing that in transformation of money, you're also not keeping up. And so we just, I think either keep up or, be careful because technology moves fast and you don't want to be on the other side of that. So,
yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, it's just funny. One of the common themes I've heard today is you guys kind of, moving and building kind of quietly over the last decade and a half, which is really fun. And I think some of those companies that operate like that are sometimes the most interesting. There's such a rise today of obviously Michael Saylor is a hot topic always. And then there's tons of copycats that are trying to do this leveraged, in some ways leveraged Bitcoin treasury strategy on corporate balance sheets. I had a tweet, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or something that there's all this hype around that, which is fine, but there's actual builders that are building the real infrastructure that's doing real things with Bitcoin. And so I just want to get your take, I guess, on the Bitcoin treasuries, because I think what you guys are building is just much more interesting. But I didn't know if you saw any value creation to the trend of these Bitcoin treasury companies, and I understand that they're opening up the markets to players that couldn't get in prior, maybe in the bond market or something like that. But what's your all's take on that? Just operating companies building in the space versus, more so just kind of buy and hold and lever up, that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I mean, both exist for very different reasons. I'm a view that builders ultimately grow. What is GDP at the end of the day? It's like the economic output, of a country or society of building more goods and services, right? And if you do more of that, that creates more abundance. And so I just personally lean towards it. It's not, I don't sort of judge other things, but my kind of experience with that is, I got involved in tech in the late 90s, and the first startup I was at, this founder was just amazing. And they were building like hardware tech that, they called it kind of nanotech at the time, but it was effectively the ability to create the manufacturing equipment that shrunk computers down into the size of, our phones that can fit in our pocket. And what happened there, is we were building real hardware and real things, and everybody was talking about the internet. And when the company our company got acquired, and then was on a NASDAQ, and that was a really fun ride to see that. And that took me out to New York when I was really young. And as a kid that didn't grow up with much, seeing Wall Street was just like a wildly eye-opening experience. And I was constantly like blown away on how much these organizations grew by basically, sort of financial engineers and financial packaging. Meanwhile, we were just like, helping try to build, the next compute vehicle. And so I think what I've seen over time is like, Wall Street and the banking industry is going to exist. You are going to have financialization of everything. It's just the nature of human nature to do things like that, and that's fine. And there's probably a lot of value creation that gets done in the monetary terms. So I think, those companies will have reasons for it. They're very innovative financial products that they've done. The way that they think about, absorbing the debt market and the bond market is super interesting. So these are all very interesting to me, financial and economic exercises. But I personally believe that most of the economy is actually people who build real goods and services. And so I think a lot of the Bitcoin space just is only seeing financialization right now, which to me is kind of ironic. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just ironic.
Yeah.
Where Bitcoin was designed to actually change our economic systems of how we operate and live. And so I just hope, I'm excited about the next stage of operating companies that go, we run a high growth, profitable company that builds cool products and services in the space, whether it's in Bitcoin or adjacent, and then goes, of course, it's obvious that we're going to have Bitcoin on our balance sheet. Right. It's obvious if you were a company down in South America and you were building, incredible, manufacturing things that then get sent over the supply chain, and then you might store dollars versus your peso. That's just so obvious. But that doesn't make you not actually building, whatever the car part that needs to get sent back to the US to get, put in the Tesla or whatever. And so I think there's going to be more and more of those companies. It's going to be, it'll give those companies leverage, which, in our case it does. But that is 99% of the economy is that. It's not, financialization. So.
Yeah. Okay, this is great. We can kind of wrap it up here in the last, 5 minutes or so. I want to just ask, what's on the horizon that you can share maybe for Paystand in the next, call it 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think we, as a company, we're building more and more financial, products. So we started on the receivable and payment side. Now we have this corporate card and expense product. We are continuing to grow our infrastructure in our business. So that those are all cool things. I would say now we feel like we one of the things I think a lot about is stewardship. And so we will build more products and services for this industry now that it's more mature, and I think that's just, a chance to be able to be good neighbors back, is to say, if we're helping a lot of these TradFi companies, use on-chain solutions on Bitcoin, boy, we should help. Now that there is a thriving Bitcoin economy, we should help those companies. So we're do more of that. And so, our TeamPay product's awesome there. We also, we've been quite acquisitive. And so we bought a company somewhat recently that has not just in the US, but supports, sort of all of the Americas and parts of the global South. And so, we will be more global in nature, which we're really excited about. So expect that, and then I think, in the long run, I hope the company will have a role to be able to prove that there are good builders in the space. So whenever the company, it makes sense for us to go, public, I think we want to be able to prove that there's staying power. There's, there's a kind of company in the market that's mature, that creates real value, that traditional investors will understand, the traditional companies will understand. And we just think the ecosystem will be better for it. And so, we hope that we can be the strange bridge that, both, Bitcoin companies can kind of understand, and hopefully respect. And then at the same time, we can bring more and more companies, into the fold, into the ecosystem, into the movement, because that would be radical. If all companies in the world are operating on Bitcoin, whether they know it or not, man, wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that's such an important bridge. You talk to, not going to call anybody out by any means, but there's some hardcore Bitcoin maxis, right? And that would scoff at a banker or a financial advisor, right? And I think I've met more and more people this year that are saying, of course we all came to Bitcoin in our own time, but we should, approach those people with open arms and see what role they can play. And sure, their roles might change, things might get shuffled around, and that's fine. but let's see how we can all work at this together and just improve lives and the economy and everything. So, hey, one quick question that I did want to make sure I asked, that I thought about earlier and then I forgot, is I think we've been talking mostly you all are leveraging on chain. Are you all leveraging the Lightning Network at all? Liquid, any kind of layer twos? And one last question with that would be, if you are from a payment standpoint or you plan to, do you have any intention to leverage any of your Bitcoin stack to, create yield by collecting payment, the transaction fees on the Lightning Network through that?
Yeah. It's so funny. It's kind of cool how the market's matured, because in the early days, people would ask all the technical questions, and I'd often go like, yeah, like that's really fun, but let me also like make sure that like real business value is getting created. But my background's in engineering, so I love that stuff.
Okay.
Yes, we run our own layer 2
Okay.
on the Bitcoin blockchain, and in a way that was not because we really wanted to quite frankly. It was just when we got started and we needed to scale, like back in the old days, people would always say there's like these scaling challenges, like Bitcoin can't scale, right? And so, we needed to figure out a way to do that. We also run a lot of business logic, like around smart contracts and things like that, because, literally our customers have contracts that move an invoice that then like delivers a goods and services that then someone needs to pay them against, right? So,
Yeah.
and so, there weren't at scale layer 2s when we started our business, and so we actually had to go build our own. And our own is sort of a combination that looks Lightning like, and sort of smart contract support driven, that we've used internally for a long time now. I think one of the things and that was out of practicality. I think one of the things we're also really excited about, engaging more of the ecosystem now is like, I'm a big believer in open source. I'm a big believer in giving back. And so like, I think we over time will move more of our infrastructure onto kind of layer 2 open standards. It just quite frankly didn't exist 5 or 7 years ago. And so I think there's a lot more to come there that we'll probably announce. And, whether it's smart contracts or stable coins or other things, like I think these are all things that ultimately can and should live on the Bitcoin blockchain. Done in a respectful way for block space. And I think you need companies who can come along and say like, well, this is what it looks like to move tens of billions or hundreds of billions of volume over it in mission critical ways that need to be moved, instantly. And, and so like, I think that's the thing that we've had a lot of work that we've had to do, just like maybe Amazon had to when they were the first big e-commerce company. They just had to figure out, how could I don't know, whatever, 1 million people hit their servers, Thanksgiving, Black Friday or whatever, before that was standard. And so that's one thing we get to offer to the community, and hopefully we'll be more and more involved there.
Man, this is great, Jeremy. I appreciate you jumping on today. Just closing remarks, maybe just give us a handoff if our audience is interested in working with Paystand, where can they find you all? And just any final thoughts before we head out.
Yeah, it's just an honor, Jordan. Like anytime we get to engage the community, where I enjoy it, I don't get to spend all my time here, so it's really fun. So thank you. Thank you all for what you guys all do. You're all a really important part of the ecosystem on a movement we all believe in. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of if you want to like find me. I'm on both Twitter/X and LinkedIn. Jeremy Almond, just all one word. Quite easy to find. And then if you're a company and you're interested in, a corporate card that's really built for this ecosystem, you can go to paystand.com. That product is called TeamPay. We also can help with, receivables and payments and other things, but corporate card is usually the thing they start with. It's really easy to spend in dollars, stack sats. And then the last plug I'd give, I have a side hustle as well, which is a podcast called Redefined, which is really designed for normie business people to start understanding on-chain solutions. So oftentimes I'll interview, policymakers or, sort of business leaders and kind of their view of things that are on chain. And so that's a little bit more of an easier entry point. So that's called Redefined. That's on YouTube as well, Spotify. And then if you want to understand our philanthropic efforts, that's paystand.org. I think we're in 20 countries, 40 communities, and we've helped tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands at this point. It's hard to keep track, of all the cool Bitcoin circular economies around the world. So we always love partners there. So
beautiful. Jeremy, thank you so much. All right. And we'll talk to you all soon. Bye.
Cheers, Jordan.